So Senator, thank you for doing the forum 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry it had to be from Washington. And you guys lucked out because my daughter walked out on stage every time people were getting too close to the end and stood over them, intimidating them.
And said that their time was up.
She didn't have to say it. She's just like this.
She was just there.
So they get thrown off, but we didn't have her in Washington. And there was a little delay in the C-SPAN.
Oh, I could see the delay as I watched the replay on it, yeah.
But the guy, Jack Heath, who you've done his show before, did just an awesome job. These two guys won't say it because he kept going over the time. But to be able to ask the questions of all you guys in 2 hours on the fly.
No, I thought he did a good job. I thought he was a good moderator. I thought he was not overly easy or overly hard. I mean, I thought he was fair and down the middle.
Yeah, that's Drew Klein coming in. He has to work for a living.
Solomon.
Oh, it's Solomon. It's not even Drew. Where's Drew?
You're on
No.
time? I thought for sure.
We were waiting for
At the
you.
end of the schedule. As we are.
No, he's got other events.
Yeah,
We've
we
got
got
a
a-
hard out of
Hey,
here
Senator.
at 5
Hey,
o'clock.
Dave Solomon, glad to meet you.
So no, you haven't missed anything, Dave. We were just chatting about the forum 2 weeks ago, and somebody put a clock on the Fox one, and as I suspected, with the exception of Trump and the 3 moderators, nobody got the time to answer questions that we gave 14 of you
Right.
in 2 hours that they did in 10. You're big on the flat tax.
Yeah, and I think what's extraordinary about ours is that it is different than any other flat tax that's ever been presented in the sense that we have a low flat rate, both personal and individual, both individual and business, but we also get rid of the payroll tax. So we roll the payroll tax into the business tax. If I were the nominee, the only way to win on this issue is to attract the working class to this issue. The working class has always been told by Democrats that the flat tax is only going to help the rich. Why? Because the working class don't pay the income tax, so a flat tax doesn't help them any. And that's largely true. If you make $50,000 or less, you don't pay much income tax. By getting rid of the payroll tax, I can look at a $40,000 a year worker and say you're going to get $2,000 more in your paycheck because the business is now going to pay the payroll tax. And as part of our plan, we say that the first dollars that come out of the business tax will be to pay for Social Security and to pay for Medicare. So we actually fully fund them. So they're fully funded. Now people say, well, what about the rest of the government? And I say, well, it's going to be short. And so you're going to have to get rid of some of your government. But we'll fund the things. If you want Medicare and you want Social Security, we'll fully fund them. That just is number one that comes out of it. And then the other part of our plan is to raise the rates. We'd make it a super majority to try to keep the rates as fixed as we could.
And you've run the numbers as to what this would do for income coming into the government and how much
Chris
less
Wallace
it would
said
be?
we would steal trillions of dollars from the government, and I said, you're exactly right. We want to leave it with the people. And it's a debate we're not really having. In Washington, there is no significant movement, other than myself and a few conservatives, for cutting taxes. Everybody in Washington wants to do revenue neutral tax reform. You talk to the leaders of the tax committee, you talk to Paul Ryan, you talk to Orrin Hatch, you talk to all the leaders of the committees, they want to do revenue neutral tax reform. And I tell people, if that's what we're for, I'm going home. I don't care. I mean, who cares about switching the burden or shifting the burden from here to here and having the net result be neutral? The problem with a net result that is neutral is how do we make the argument we're helping people? I want to go to the south side of Chicago with a novel argument and say, I'm going to leave $3 billion in the south side of Chicago. I'm not going to have you send it to Washington, and I'm going to help poor people by leaving money in your community that I never take. I'm not bringing you back anything. I'm just going to leave it in your community. There are businesses that succeed in the south side of Chicago, not that many, but they still pay enough taxes that we wouldn't have to transfer money from somewhere else. We just leave it in their community. Over a 10-year period, I'd leave about $3 billion there. So you can argue that tax cuts are stimulus, that tax cuts are leaving money in the consumer's hands and that they're leaving money with those who frankly earned it, but they're also leaving money in a community that's very poor. So I do specific and extensive additional tax cuts for areas of poverty, kind of like what Jack Kemp talked about. Also, though, just for the general economy, the argument is where are jobs better created, in Washington or leaving it in the hands of the people? And I think we give up on that argument. And really, I was never really clear whether Romney was for cutting taxes I was never really clear whether McCain was for cutting taxes. The last time we had a candidate who clearly ran on a tax program of cutting taxes was Reagan. He ran on dramatically cutting the rates, and he said government's the problem, not the solution. We just haven't had that clear cut of a distinction in a long time.
Have you, maybe you're shortchanging yourself here, by cutting the taxes, aren't you stimulating the economy, which is going to bring in more revenue?
Yeah, there may well be, and in fact, over time, we score it dynamically. The Tax Foundation does it a couple ways. Scored statically, it's nearly $3 trillion tax cut over 10 years.
Yeah.
Scored dynamically, it's about $1 trillion. We think actually economic activity will bring a couple $1 trillion in. They say, the Tax Foundation says it's the most pro-growth tax plan put out so far. The other thing we do, and one of the things they say is the most pro-growth part of this new tax plan, is we let people 100% expense everything in the first year. And I tell people, I became aware of this when I had a small business. I had 4 employees in my doctor's office, and I bought the furniture for my lobby, and it cost me $5,000 at Office Depot. And I'm like,
Right.
when I can write it off, right? It's an expense. And my accountant says, yeah, over 36 years. It's like, good luck on the furniture from Office Depot lasting 36 years, or me.
That's good stuff from China.
Yeah.
Do you think that Steve Forbes failed to catch on because he was a rich guy promoting a flat tax?
I think one thing that's always amazed me is how people still remember. I mean, I can barely remember what year that was, but I still remember Steve Forbes and the flat tax.
2000, we endorsed him.
Okay, I thought it was 96, but
Well,
it was
he
it was
did it
two.
both
He ran both
times.
times. But anyway, it stuck with him, and I think, I don't know exactly, nobody knows exactly why people win and lose. Everybody has their theories. I think had he been the governor of New Jersey, already having won a statewide position and promoting the gas tax, I think we have trouble, or at least we used to. It doesn't seem like we do now, but we used to have trouble sort of conceiving of people being president who hadn't been elected to anything before. We used to think that there might be a problem just starting there. And we'll still see. I think ultimately American people probably are not going to elect somebody that has never been elected to something. But I always liked Steve Forbes, and thought that he would have, had he been governor of New Jersey or governor of New York before, I thought he had a better chance probably.
Well, he likes your flat tax.
He does?
And he's said so. But you throw your own curve into it, don't you, with the subsidy for college education? You said the other day they could talk about deductions over 30 years.
Yeah.
They can go to Dartmouth and deduct that forever?
We have a lot of different plans. Some of them would be for the current tax code, and some of them would be for our new tax code is what it is. So we wouldn't have the college tax credit as part of our new tax code. But if you have the existing tax code with the high taxes that we have, 42% rate at the top, I don't mind throwing in some more tax credits to make taxes lower. Also, I think it's important for Republicans to have some kind of plan to counteract the free plan. The president's got free, Hillary Clinton's got free. I think if we're going to have something to help college kids, it should be tied to work, and a tax deduction over time is at least tied to work. It's a lot less bad than saying free. But
What are you saying that if your flat tax goes through, that wouldn't be a problem?
Our tax plan overall doesn't have that as an official part of it. It would just have what we have. The taxes would be so low, people would be saving thousands of dollars every individual just on their not hiring an accountant, just putting their income down or multiplying by 0.145. And so I think that ultimately there'd be enormous economic gain, and people wouldn't worry as much about expense. But I too try to point out to the kids, and I get this question everywhere I go around New Hampshire. They ask me about global warming, they ask me about student loans, and they ask me about financing of elections. Some of these people I think are actually sent there to ask me these questions.
No.
Yeah.
Beyond will tell you that?
But when I answer the question about student loans, I make sure they know that there are only 2 parts of our economy where prices continue to rise above the rest: education and healthcare. What's the commonality? Government subsidizes both, and if you subsidize the demand, you'll have higher prices.
Yeah, it's good to speak
So
about.
can you walk us through what this plan, the flat tax plan, would look like, say for a single person making $30,000 and a family of 4 making $100,000? I mean, if I'm making $30,000, do I just multiply that by 0.14, or how does that work?
If you make $30,000, you wouldn't pay any income tax. You don't now, and you won't under my plan. The difference is under this, you won't pay a payroll tax either. At $40,000, it's about $2,000 in payroll. So at $30,000, it's probably $1,500 or something. But you wouldn't have to pay your payroll tax. Now somebody's got to pay it. It's paid through your business. And part of the way this is made up is actually there wouldn't be caps on salaries either. Salaries would be taxed. Business has to pay a tax on your salary. So it is all included. It's no longer, salaries are no longer deductible from the cost. And so there is more of a base of money being taxed, but it's a much lower rate and a much simpler code. I think the key to winning, if you were the Republican nominee, to winning the general election and winning your tax plan, and that's, I want to do this more than an academic exercise. An academic exercise, you can just be for no income tax, and then you are the most conservative candidate. But I want something that it would actually fund a smaller government than what we have, but that actually I think the public would actually embrace in a general election. And I think I could sit across the table from Hillary Clinton and say, what are you going to do for the working class? I'm going to leave $2,000 in their paycheck.
But if I'm making $100,000 and I'm a family of four, I don't have that child deduction anymore, mortgage deduction, that's all out the window.
We end up leaving in mortgage and charity.
And then, but you still multiply that $100,000 by point.
Kind of. You have about $50,000 worth of exemptions. I think it's $20,000 a piece, and then 5 or 10 for each kid or something. So there are per person credits that add up to about $50,000. Currently, people 50 and under don't pay income tax, essentially. They might pay a little tiny bit, but not very much. We'd keep that kind of the same. And some argue, well, everybody should pay. Well, the problem is then you're talking about raising taxes on poor people, which I don't think is going to go over very well. So we like to keep it about the same, exempt the first 50. So if you make 100, really you're being taxed on 50. So it's probably about approximately 50 times 0.145. So really it's about half of that. If you make 100, it's really, you're talking about a 7 or 8% tax rate. It's a low tax rate. And but we want that. We want to have the debate, where's the money better spent? Leaving it in the private economy or sending it to Washington. But government would have to be smaller, and that's the big debate. People in Washington sometimes are for cutting taxes. Actually, very few of them anymore are. Republicans historically were for cutting taxes, but you also have to be for a smaller government. So I would eliminate several departments of government. I'd get rid of the Department of Education. I'd get rid of the Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, Interior. I'd send HUD back to the states. I would make government a lot smaller, and the priority would be defending the country.
Would the flat tax rate be the same for the guy making $1 million as it is for the guy making
14.5%. Everybody gets the same.
You say 14 now?
14.5.
14.5, yeah, okay.
But then what's
But the guy making $1 million would pay 10 times more in taxes than the guy making 100.
Oh, I understand that.
You do. A lot of people don't, though. I like to emphasize that, though. The guy making $1 million pays 10 times more.
Well, if you look at Hillary Clinton, she made something like $38 million, and she
There'd be a special Clinton tax, because there would be a graft tax. You would have to have a graft tax,
But she pays more than 13% taxes. So would people like her?
Oh yeah, a lot of people do. I mean, if you probably make between 100 and 200, you probably pay 22% to 25%. If you make between 200 and 500, you're probably up around 28 to 32, something like that. You make above 200 or 300, you're probably up around 35 to 40, somewhere around there.
So those people would pay significantly less.
Yeah, I want them to. I want everybody to, but see, I care about where the money is. When you pay your taxes, the money is in government. When you pay less taxes, the money is in the private economy. And jobs are created in the private economy, and the government doesn't create anything. Government is a necessary evil, and so we should have it as small as we possibly can have it. I always tell people the two arguments. Government is a necessary evil. That's sort of the liberty argument that Thomas Paine put forward. The other argument is the efficiency argument that Friedman put forward, and that is that nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as your own, so you shouldn't give it to them. We should give a very little amount to government because they don't spend it very wisely.
Senator, did you say an individual wage earner making $50,000 doesn't pay any income tax?
For the most part, that's true.
Not been my experience.
You'd have to look up the exact statistics on it, but I think it's pretty accurate. I think if you look at $75,000 and above, they pay 96% of the income tax. So it's small dollar-wise, and I just don't think it's more than a few $100s at most for income tax below 50. Tax Foundation has a lot of good statistics and tables on that.
Besides taxes, you said kids, and you think some of them may be plants, but what from the voters in New Hampshire are you getting for?
I think people are still kind of concerned with the same things they were concerned with when I was elected in 2010. People are concerned with the debt. People are concerned with how much we're accumulating of it. They're concerned that it threatens sort of that while things seem to be getting a little better, jobs seem to be getting easier to come by, income seems to be doing a little better, that beneath the surface there is a problem. Some sort of, the foundation is sort of cracked of the country. And I think they see and can understand and sort of in their gut know that it doesn't make sense to borrow money from China to pay for our daily expenses. And I try to put it in ways that people can comprehend that way. I try to say, look, would you borrow money to pay your rent? Would you borrow money to go to the grocery store? And you might in a pinch for a week or two, but everybody knows you can't live by borrowing money for your daily expenses. That's what we do in Washington. The other thing I think resonates with people is that we bring in $3 trillion worth of government, and many people want to say, oh, you don't believe in any government. And so I'll often say, yeah, I believe in $3 trillion worth,
right.
Just spend what comes in. That's not a minuscule government. That's still a pretty good sized government. But it'd be it's night and day. Nobody in Washington believes in that. They all would give it lip service. But I've presented 3 different budgets that balance over 5 years. And I get about 1/3 of the Republican vote and no Democrat vote.
Republicans were lost when they went to Medicare Part D. That's with no income test whatsoever.
And those people still run the place.
Yeah.
They run the place, and it's an argument for term limits. And that's another thing in the campaign as far as talking about how we get people excited about cleaning out the place. Term limits would clean the place out.
If you got term limits, would you be for public financing of elections?
The one thing I am for, as far as trying to limit special interest and money influencing elections, I don't like the idea of funding them, because I think then entrenched politicians are more likely to get elected. If you're the incumbent and I'm the challenger, I've got to spend more money than you.
Huge, which is why term limits sort of truncates the amount of time they can do that for.
Right. So that I think is beneficial. But then the only thing that I would do that I think you could do in campaign finance reform is that if you work for government and I'm giving you $1 billion, a very large amount for a contract, I would put as part of the contract say that you can't lobby me. And I might limit you contributions as well. I mean, if all of these are your board members and all of you, give the $10,000 to politicians every year, but you're getting $1 billion contract, it does look a little unseemly that you're able to contribute to me when I'm giving you a contract. So there are problems with that. And I think there is campaign finance reform that could pass if it were based on government contracts. But you'd have to limit the unions too. So government unions that get part of contracts would also have to be limited in their giving as well. Then you'd limit both corporations and unions that do business with government.
How realistic is it to push for a term limit?
It will never pass in Washington. The question is, and I have an open mind on whether or not there's going to come a time when people are going to be, they're already angry. Right now they haven't focused their anger, but I think there may come a time in which people do focus their anger and say, you know what? We're going to call a convention. If they will not do what we tell them to do, we're going to call a convention. We're going to have a balanced budget amendment. And we're going to have a term limits amendment. I think what would happen is the day before they were to meet, Congress would do what they're supposed to do. That's about the only way that Congress will do what they're supposed to do.
So besides the debt and funding college education, what are you being asked? Are you surprised by either anything you're being asked or not being asked?
Not really. The other thing I try to point out to differentiate myself, I think that my stand on privacy and the NSA differentiates myself. But the other thing is, and I said this at the Politics and Eggs the other morning, is that there really is an unholy alliance between Republicans and Democrats to spend money. And unless we kind of acknowledge this, we're never going to fix the problem. The sequester, many in the Republican Party bellyache, oh, the sequester, we've got to get rid of the sequester, we have no military without the sequester. The problem is then they go to the Democrats who say the exact same thing. Oh, we can't get enough welfare, we don't have enough welfare. So what happens? Paul Ryan and Barbara Mikulski get together and they got rid of the sequester. Well, what does that do? It just means the debt goes up. They got rid of over $100 billion worth of sequester savings. They just erased it, because they both wanted more money for their own causes.
Have you had a chance to look at Defense Department in particular, and how much do you think could be cut out of there? And by what means?
I think what we have to do, first of all, is acknowledge that we spend more than our next 14 countries combined. And so it's not that we're not spending any money or that we're absolutely, I mean, we're spending a lot of money. We spend more.
Include China?
Yeah, next 14 countries. So there's the United States, and then there's probably Russia, China, France, Germany, all the other sort of NATO allies.
China's budget for
You-
defense is all above board, and you can
Well,
see it.
you know,
and
that
believe it.
you might be able to argue that. I don't know the argument on that or not. But the official numbers that are out there, the next 14 countries combined equal what we spend. So it's not like we're spending insignificantly. And you could argue that our NATO allies are not spending enough, and I think there's an argument for that too. The exact number I don't know. I will tell you that I'm a fan of like John Lehman, who was the youngest Secretary of the Navy under Reagan. And he advised Romney, and I think he gave Romney some good advice. Our Navy's lacking and we need more ships. Which particular ships, you know, I think is open for a more detailed discussion. But the one thing that Romney did not say that Lehman says is, if you'll read Lehman, Lehman had a good article about a year ago or so. In that article, he says, yeah, we need more ships, but one way we should pay for them is getting rid of bureaucracy at the Pentagon. So a lot of good military people who are career military people who know the Pentagon in and out will tell you there is waste there. The one thing he points out is, like, when he was the Secretary of the Navy, there were 7 joint task forces. There's 250 now. So just this expansion, you can't go anywhere without tripping over an admiral or a general. They're everywhere, and just we got too big and bloated. So I'm one who believes that I'll spend what it takes on the defense. So I can't say I'm going to actually absolutely cut it. I can't tell you it grows 2 or 3%. I'll spend what it takes. But I will tell you I won't borrow from China for it. So we had a big budget vote, and Rubio and the other people who don't believe in any restraint with spending if it comes to the military put forward an increase of $200 billion. And I said, well, I'll accept your premise. We need $200 billion more for defense, but why don't we pay for it? So he introduced an amendment to the budget that would have added $200 billion of debt, basically, with no pay for. And they all voted for it, and I voted no. And I introduced a side-by-side amendment, which I think is the most clear-cut distinction between myself and Rubio and Cruz and all the others that will just vote for anything. I voted against theirs, but I put their exact amendment up, and I cut $200 billion worth of current spending on the domestic side and said, all right, let's pay for it. I got 4 people voted for mine. It's easy to vote for the spending. It's harder to be fiscally conservative. But I don't think, I do believe that when Admiral Mullen said that the #1 threat to our national security is our debt, I do believe that. I don't think you project power from bankruptcy court. And the people who want to borrow money to send it to Pakistan, I think, are foolish in making us weaker. We did something in our waste report this week that was, I'll tell you 2 items from our waste report in the last 6 months. We gave $250,000 to Pakistani kids to come to space camp in Alabama.
Nice.
Where does that money come from? We bought it from China to send it to Pakistan to bring Pakistani kids here to space camp. We spent $800 grand developing a cricket league in Afghanistan, a televised cricket league. One of the problems is they don't have TVs in Afghanistan. The other is, where do we get $800 grand for a cricket league? You know, a televised cricket league. But that kind of stuff abounds.
So you
throughout
have
the-
like the old Proxmire Golden Fleece?
We're doing something like that. We don't have a very good name. We're calling ours waste report, but we
Yeah,
have.
it's lousy.
We need.
Sounds like the EPA in a ribbon.
I know we need a better PR firm for us, but we are finding some things like that, and we sprinkle them in the speeches as well. I think we spent $300 grand on studying Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous when they're on cocaine.
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Turns out they probably are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's an awkward question for you. The night before the debate in Cleveland, 3 guys who had been associated with your dad's campaign, and I think one of them with your PAC,
Right.
got indicted. And your comment was, nice timing on this indictment.
It's been going on for 4 years, and for goodness sakes, if they've done something wrong, tell them. It's also a little bit of an example of how we've gone overboard with sort of these things. It is a regulatory thing. It's a campaign finance rule, and I don't know if they did or didn't do it, or who did or didn't fill out the paperwork, or whether it was purposeful or not. But whether or not you report something accurately to the FEC, you know, there will have to be rules. But should we put people in jail for 25 years for that? So that's kind of what some of them are looking at. And then when you threaten people with 25 years in jail, what do you think they're liable to do?
Turn on the etiquette.
Say whatever You want them to say to get a
Whatever
lesser.
works.
lesser
So
sentence.
what's Senator Rand Paul, not your campaign, but your position on those guys? And one of them is a relative, or he's married to
Right.
Ron's grandson. I think he was on his campaign.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
I think we
I don't really have an opinion on the details of it because I don't know exactly, what the details are. So I don't really have an opinion on that, other than to say that it seems a little suspicious that on the day before a presidential debate, they would have something they waited 4 years on,
Yeah.
and it just happens to come out the day before a debate. So, it's Obama's Justice Department. It's also one of the guys who I think had something, I think he was called before he's an associate of Lois Lerner's, and he was asked to testify before a House committee, and I think refused to testify. I think he was asked 34 questions that he refused to testify to.
Which leads me to Lois Lerner in the IRS, and Paul Montgomery, who's our Sunday editor, has asked this of other presidential candidates. If you get in, are you going to hold the current IRS accountable for the seemingly political activity that they've done against conservative groups in the past several years?
Yeah, and I think the best way to make them accountable is to let them go. I mean, I would get rid of most of the IRS, if not the whole thing. I mean, if you have a simple tax code with one rate, you really don't need much for an IRS.
Mm-hmm.
But I would downsize government. I've always been a believer that they shouldn't be paid more than the private sector. They make, on average, 25 to 30% more than the private sector. So if I could, and I would have to see whether you can do this, but I'd do whatever I could through executive order to make the government smaller immediately. Through executive order, I would try to undo as many things as the president has done and take that power away and give it back to the states and the people. And I think there's quite a bit that could be done because so many bad things have been done through executive orders. I think that if you actually had a president that wanted to make government smaller, you could.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the difference between me and a Jeb Bush. Does anybody have the expectation if Jeb Bush is the president, he's going to make government smaller? He's going to be good at governance. But it's going to be governing the same size government or a government that still continues to grow. Government, the status quo is this explosive growth of government. That's what the status quo is. It would take somebody really pushing back at that, someone who truly believed in limited government. And I guess that's what disappoints me about any conservative or any Tea Party conservative thinking that Donald Trump's going to be the man. This is a guy who's for Obamacare. This is a guy who's been for liberal Democrats, giving money to Nancy Pelosi and Charlie Rangel and Harry Reid through the years. All of a sudden, because he can call people fat and stupid, we're going to believe that he really is that he's going to be a true conservative for us. It stretches credulity, but I think people are just upset with Washington, and because he says strong statements, they think he might be a conservative.
They don't necessarily going to vote for the guy. They know him, so he's up in opinion polls, which at the moment don't mean a lot. Are you going to spend anything on immigration, and if so, how?
What do you mean spend anything?
Well, you want to get rid of a lot of government departments and make government smaller.
Yeah, no, I think it's an obligation of government to take control of our borders, and I think if you can say that there's one thing that the executive has not done is enforce our immigration laws. Not only this one, the last one too. In fact, I would go all the way back to '86. A deal was made in '86, the Simpson-Mazzoli bill, and they said, in exchange for normalizing and giving status to 3 million people, we're going to secure the border. But it never came. And if you'll talk to people like Grassley, who are now against immigration reform, he voted for the '86 bill. But he said, well, I'm still waiting for the security to come, and it never came, so I was sold a bill of goods. So really, I've come to believe that you can't do anything until you elect a president that will enforce the current law. That doesn't mean that it's perfect. I mean, there are a lot of things we should do better as far as updating things and making it so we know who's coming in and out. But really enforcing the current law, I think if someone actually did that and you got to a point where the only people that came in, I think a president who really wanted to could say the only people that come in are legal. I think you really could have a virtually zero tolerance for anything but legal immigration.
What level of legal immigration should we have?
I think that's debatable. And I think that one way I've always had in the back of my mind, and this would be only after the border is completely secure, is one way you could assimilate the people who are already here that came illegally would be to say, well, why don't they be part of the normal immigration? So if 1 million people come in a year, why don't we start for the next 11 years, we'll internally immigrate the 11 million over 11 years. And it would take a while to process them anyway, make sure they're not criminals and background checks and get them plugged into the system. But then you wouldn't have to deport them necessarily. But even that, you don't want to promise that and make that law until you've already secured your border.
Yeah.
If you do anything that's promissory or if you give any kind of benefit that you think you're going to do to those, before you secure the border, then more come.
Sure.
You know, so you have to secure the border, and then there are things you can do like that, like internal immigration of the 11 million that are here.
And everybody says secure the border. What is the Senator Paul plan to secure the border?
A big
And
part
which
of
border?
Well, I think all
We
of
got
them.
one up here too.
Yeah, I think all of them have to be secure for national security purposes. We need to know who comes in and who goes. It's also a very cumbersome old system. You talk to the farmers who actually do use migrant workers. It's a paper system. It takes 2 months to get a worker approved. The other thing is if I've had a worker who's come every year and goes back and forth, and there are some for 18, 20 years, should I have to start over every year with the same process? Shouldn't there be an easier process? Well, I say, the guy's been helping me last year, he's coming back again.
Right.
You know, and so there ought to be easier and simpler ways. But I think your biggest control of the border is not physical so much as it's having an adequate functioning legal immigration. I think makes it such that people don't want to go around the system. If the legal system works, you don't go around the system. But then there have to be checkpoints, and there have to be the ability. But I've always thought, people think we need a 20-foot tall fence. Maybe we do in certain big cities. But I also think there are technological ways of monitoring the border. For goodness sakes, don't you think you'd have a station and a helicopter that could patrol 300 miles?
Or a drone.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You send a drone up and down, sees any movement, anytime anybody crosses, you send the helicopter down, pick them up, and take them back. And you just do it every time. And if there's a zero tolerance, I think in the end, people's behavior will change over a while. But we do the opposite. You come across and you're an unaccompanied minor from Guatemala, we take you to Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Alaska. We've taken people all over the place. And so then the next wave says, well, sounds good, you go, they'll find you a spot there.
Yeah.
And so another wave comes. But you have to enforce the law, and really we haven't had a president that was willing to do it.
No, it's been the other way around. Isn't it? His executive orders have
Right. Well,
legalized.
particularly on the sanctuary city thing, it's been the president actually changing what was customarily the law. And the best analogy I heard of this is, if you have someone in jail for shoplifting or a minor robbery in Manchester, and Vermont wants them for murder, do you think Manchester jail just lets them go? It never happens. The only time it ever would happen is if it was an immigration crime. It's the only law we ignore in the whole world. States have been having joint custody of criminals probably since the beginning of the Republic. We never let people go who are wanted for a violent crime. Vermont would serve an order to the Manchester jail, and they would go by a jail van over to the other jail for trial.
Vermont's probably not a good example. It's Bernie Sanders territory.
How do you do email? Do you have a work email and a personal email? Do you have a...
In the executive branch, the rules are you have to use a government email. In our branch, there are no rules on which email you use.
Do you have a private server in your basement?
No. But I think that's a big scandal. And I think really the two of them, to me, go to judgment. Whether or not she was ultimately prosecuted for it. Is it good judgment to disobey the rules when you're the Secretary of State? And there's almost no way you can't be dealing with sensitive. You know, Napolitano and Fox has said her schedule's probably classified. Would you want everybody to know where the Secretary of State's jogging? And it's a danger not only to her, to the people who guard her, to have people know where she might be in advance. So that it's ridiculous to think she's going to send that on an unsecured server. But now they're finding top secret things. I mean, it may well be, this is what Petraeus was kicked out of the military for, is that he was sharing things, I guess, with somebody who was not supposed to get that. And it sounds like Sidney Blumenthal was getting about every bit of information that was going on, anything Hillary Clinton knew he was getting.
But she's going to turn over a private server now.
Because she's being forced to.
Exactly.
We were selling her server on our campaign website for a while. You could actually get one that said Clinton hard drive, and we were selling them. So,
Senator, there's a natural libertarian constituency here in New Hampshire for your message. That free state movement, you're trying to attract like-minded individuals here for 10 years now. Have you reached out to them at all? Do you have any connections?
We have. We've met with some of the Free State folks, and the difficulty sometimes with libertarians are that some libertarians want to stay in the Libertarian Party, some don't want to vote at all, and then some will vote in Republican primary if they're convinced to. So it's not always easy, but we do, and there's a lot of issues that we share, and we want them to come over and vote in the Republican Party, make the Republican Party bigger. And I'll give you an example of how it can help all Republicans. This time y'all did better in your congressional races. What, you won one Republican, the Democrat won the other one?
Yep.
But in 2012 you lost both of them, and they both lost by 4%, and the Libertarian at each time got 4.5%. So if you can get a Republican who has some libertarianness about them, I think you can attract 3 or 4 points more into your primary that are sitting out or voting for a third party. But yes, we do want them to vote in the Republican primary. We need them to vote in the Republican primary.
Remind me to tell my friend Frank about this, Mike. Drew, have anything?
Yeah, so you mentioned Jeb Bush just a minute ago, and you had said on Laurie Show that he's not a conservative, and because he's part of the establishment. Are you the only conservative in this primary?
You know, I think there's a lot in this race, and there are some others who have conservative voting records. You know, Ted Cruz and I would probably have pretty similar voting records. Some of the distinction would be more on maybe outlook towards how to grow the party, in the sense that I spend a lot of time going places Republicans haven't gone. So I've spent time going to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, to south side of Chicago, to Detroit, to try to say we can take a message of smaller government and say, look, big government hasn't been a good friend to those who live in poverty or those who are unemployed. But there are other conservatives. I do think that one thing that distinguishes true conservatives is that you have to be conservative about everything. You can't say I'm going to give a blank check to the Pentagon and be a conservative. And this is a misconception that we've had for a long time, and that's why when we elect Republicans sometimes, we still get more debt, and government still gets bigger.
Okay.
I'm still writing. So.
Writing, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
Pencil and paper?
No one does that anymore, Drew.
My
I know,
goodness.
So, so if it's being conservative about everything, when you had this big fight with Chris Christie's debates, you seem to be isolated on that issue about national security and wiretaps and the records holdings. I mean, do you feel like that you're getting through it all on that message? You know, it's hard.
Well, I think you can sort of separate them. I think on the issue of privacy, the Fourth Amendment and the phone records, the bulk collection of phone records, 83% of people under 40 are with me. If you poll Republicans in general, I think it's over 50%. So it's not a small minority kind of issue where a few libertarians are thinking the president went too far in the phone records. I think it's over half of the Republican Party. But there's still a significant percentage on the other side too. But I don't feel like that's a small group of people that I'm talking to. I think it's a pretty large group. On the issue of foreign policy, I think really it is going to depend on how well I can present, you know, who I am on that. And it's really hard in 30 seconds, you know, or in a minute, but I'll do the best I can. But I think if I get a chance to present it, the way I like to present it is that foreign policy has a large spectrum, from nowhere any of the time, that we just stay home, we retreat behind our oceans, and that would be isolationism. But the other extreme would be everywhere all the time. And just because you don't want to be everywhere all the time doesn't make you an isolationist, it just makes you less of an interventionist. And so I think we're way over here, and I want to bring us back somewhere towards the middle. But the people I would describe in the middle would be Reagan, Eisenhower, maybe the first George Bush. And I think we've just gone since then, leaped way over to the right. But it's interesting with the people who are the interventionists. Actually, Obama and Hillary Clinton have really been interventionists. The war in Libya, I think, was a big intervention and a huge mistake, and led us to Libya is now a chaotic, failed state. ISIS, a third of Libya pledges allegiance to ISIS now. So I think you could make the argument that an intervention in Libya made us less safe. But the people in my party who are the ones who give me a hard time, They all love the war in Libya. What's their only complaint? Well, we should have put boots on the ground. That's our only mistake, though. Obama didn't put enough boots on the ground. Same with Syria. Obama did want to arm the Islamic rebels who were the allies of ISIS. So did people in my party. Their only difference is we didn't give them enough. So really the question is, who is it that really is supporting Obama's foreign policy? It's actually many in my party. They just want to do Obama's foreign policy plus. I want to do something different. I want to say, what do you think would best help the 2 million Christians in Syria? Ask them who they would like to have lead their country, Assad or ISIS. ISIS will get 0 votes. But actually most of them will tell you, even though they don't really like Assad, they will all pick Assad. Assad protects the Christians and has protected them for decades. Doesn't make him a good person. He'll gas you too if you cross him. But at the same time, they all would pick Assad. What have we done for the last several years? Put tons and tons of weapons into the people fighting Assad and pushed them back such that we allowed a safe haven and a space for ISIS to grow.
Speaking of Syria, Obama's red line there, you're president. Where would your red lines be? What would be the actions of foreign government that would trigger a response from a Paul administration?
I think the first thing to realize is you ought to be very cautious with laying down red lines, because if you're going to lay down a red line, it's of no value. In fact, it's counterproductive if you let someone come across it and you do nothing. There are obviously red lines, and a lot of them really aren't stated, but they're well known. I mean, obviously, a nuclear launch, we're prepared. We have an automatic response for a nuclear launch, from the Russians. We've always had that. I think that we say very assertively and continue to say and should say that the Article 5 of NATO is something we're not going to let someone invade a NATO country. And so I think those are some absolutes that we lay down, and those have to be very clear, and clear in advance, because they don't work as a deterrence if you're not clear. But we never had business in the Syrian civil war. And the problem was, and this is what I complained about, when we had the vote on arming the Islamic rebels in Syria, I said the great irony is we'll be back fighting our own weapons in a year, and I was right. Ambassador Ford was asked about this, and he says, well, it's inevitable that the weapons we give will go to groups that are fighting alongside al-Qaeda. I said, well, let's put it in another word. You're going to be arming the allies of al-Qaeda. Let's be very clear what we're doing here. And that's what we did, and it was a stupid idea. In fact, one CIA agent said the only thing moderate about the rebels in Syria was their ability to fight. Just same way with the Shiite government in Baghdad. They don't fight either.
Isn't that what we're doing with the Iran nuclear deal? Arming these guys to fund other bad guys, not with our weapons, but we're taking.
Yeah, I do agree. I think the deal's a bad deal, and I'm going to vote against the deal. And I think the analogy that we're arming them sometimes might be overstated in the sense that.
Well, we're not arming them, but
it could well be the result. It could well be the result, and so. One of the things that has bothered me most about the idea of the deal is when Josh Earnest says, and they ask him, well, is Iran going to change their behavior? And he says, well, it's inevitable they'll still be committing terrorism because that's just what they do. And it's like, really? Then why are we getting rid of the sanctions? See, to my mind, I'm not like some Republicans who say no negotiations, just bomb them. But I'm also not for taking a deal that really has no leverage to force them to comply over time. I think the only way you could have had leverage is to release the sanctions very slowly over a many-year period, maybe a 5-year period where we're showing compliance every year and they keep meeting a milestone, and then we remove a little bit more and we remove a little bit more. You have to remove something or you won't get an agreement. But I think they're removing everything, and the sanctions regime international, I think, breaks down, and I think it never reforms.
Wherever we've got ISIS now, and what is the United States' role relative to ISIS? Right. President Paul.
I think we have to do whatever it takes to defend our country, to defend our embassies, and to defend our soldiers, and to defend our vital interests. I think sometimes we too quickly say everything is our vital interest. Really, that's a debate. And you and I might disagree. You can have a set of facts, I have a set of facts, we listen to each other, and you say it's in our vital interest, and I might disagree. But we should defend our vital interests. But that means we have a debate, and the debate should be in Congress. And if we're to go to war again, we should go to war the way the Constitution intended. That's the way that Congress approves it, that we
Crazy
initiate.
talk, absolute
I know,
crazy
that's
talk.
completely insane. But, you know, if I think we need to go to war, or if I think it needs a question, I think the president should come before a joint session of Congress and lay out the plan and say, this is what I want, and we vote up or down on it. And I'm not excited about sending our troops back there. And I'm going to tell people, if I ever get a chance to say this on the stage, you want somebody else if you want to go back over there. So I'm not for sending 100,000 troops back into the Middle East. They've been killing each other for 1,000 years. What do we do about ISIS? I'm not against bombing them. I'm not against arming the Kurds. I'll even send some arms to those idiots in Baghdad, but we've already sent them $1 trillion worth, and what we really need to send them is tearaway uniforms, so when they run, they can rip
Well,
their uniforms off.
we
But
funded like 75 of them for.
you saw that.
Yeah.
$250 million for 60 of them.
Well, that's.
$4.5 million.
Washington average.
And and did you see what happened? They put 5 of them into the battlefield just by themselves, and they were captured immediately by Al
Yeah,
Nusra.
the others ran away with the tearaway uniforms. So Senator,
Sad.
Secretary of State Kerry is on CBS last night, and Scott Pelley asks him about Chinese hacking of our institutions and our computers, and could they have hacked your email? And Secretary Kerry says, well, yeah, I go under the assumption that they have, and so I'm very careful what I send in my email.
We're going to be back to sending our messages by carrier pigeon, you know.
That didn't work either in World War II because the Germans intercepted some of them.
No, I think that if we're talking about a role, you know, I'm a big opponent of the NSA looking at all of our phone records. I'm very much for the NSA trying to protect us from people hacking into our computers, to know how to reverse and keep hackers, Russians, Chinese, out of our stuff. But it's one reason I'm not real excited about, you know, the government's not very good at it. Somebody hacked into 21 million or 25 million of our personnel records.
Correct.
So,
But shouldn't we have the capability to protect?
yes, absolutely.
And-
That is a role of government. Then I like having the ability to spy on foreigners too, or terrorists. I'm all for that.
Did it surprise you that the Secretary of State said that he assumed that they were reading his email?
I don't know if that is maybe him just sort of saying, I'm careful and assuming they might, or if he knows technologically that they can. I don't know. But it does concern me, sure.
So despite the incumbent president's promise to close Guantanamo, it looks like it's going to still be operating.
Right.
What would you do about it? What does it say about the libertarian
Yeah.
values you espouse?
I've always thought that we spent too much energy on the actual physical location and open or closed. That, to me, what is more important, and I think also important just sort of for justice, is to give people a trial, try them and give them a sentence. I think most people there are dangerous, and I think we've actually released many people who've gone back into the battlefield to attack us. So most of them probably don't need to be released, but I also don't like keeping them forever without some kind of charge. If you're captured, and some people mistake this, they think, oh, because I'm big on the Bill of Rights and due process, everybody gets a trial. If you are an American and you're in Syria and you're aiming at a gun at us, you get no Bill of Rights, you get shot. And if you're captured over there as an American, we put you in prison, you don't get necessarily an American trial. You don't get everything an American gets. If you're captured in a battlefield, there's some kind of justice, but a military tribunal, I don't have a problem with that, and it can be done at Guantanamo Bay. So I voted not to bring people back. I think it's more complicated if you put them into our court system. However, if you're an American citizen here and your cousins live in Lebanon and you're emailing them and someone says your cousin's in Hezbollah, peripherally linked to something, you know, on whether you get a court. But even the Boston bomber, as much as we all know they were guilty and everything, I had a Boston policeman tell me, and I really liked the way he put this. He says, I was there helping people on the street that day. I was there chasing through the streets for this other boy that we caught. But he said, I was proud of our system that when we caught him, we didn't beat him to death with tire irons. You know, that's not who we are. We still all want him punished, but we didn't beat him to death with tire irons on the site, you know.
Has anybody suggested that we should or would?
No, but I mean, it's just what separates us from them, that we do have the rule of law. You know what I mean? That we do, I mean, I don't think people suggested that. I think some have suggested that he should be an enemy combatant. This is the dispute I have a little bit with the Wall Street Journal. They think you name people enemy combatants and therefore they are, and therefore they don't need to have a trial. My problem is, well, who the hell gets to decide who is an enemy combatant and who isn't?
Who gets to decide who's on the Republican presidential stage? And are you?
Right now, the networks seem to.
Yeah, and is that okay with your?
Unless some busybody newspapers get involved and have their own forum. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the rules should be on that. I really think the best rules would be that they just give me an hour of prime time every night and let me talk about what I want to talk about.
What the heck?
Well, if you're Donald Trump, you can call into the morning news shows every day and they'll put you on the air.
Yes.
Go figure.
Yes, he doesn't need
Yeah.
paid TV commercials.
I think it is complicated because the one thing is national polls, and I think you may have said this, national polls mean nothing. Poll in New Hampshire is pretty important, actually. A poll in Iowa is pretty important. This is a 50 individual state race. And the way it's set up, the early states are more important than polling in Washington State is right now.
Is there a
So-
better way to do it than the way it's set up now?
No, I don't think it's my job to tell everybody how to do it, but I think that if I were doing it, I would, if you're going to do polling, I would use state
Yeah.
polling,
Yeah.
either in addition or really just state polling. But you get some of the same result. I mean, the result, I'm not sure if it's that much difference between polling in New Hampshire and the national poll. But national polling is harder to get into when you can sometimes be resonating by going city to city in New Hampshire. You may be able to pick up resonance where you might not be getting it in a national poll.
The constrictions you said in the 30-second or 1-minute answer, do you think that you got your fair due in
I felt like I had to work my way in to get my 5 minutes, and I still got the least amount.
Yeah.
I think if I hadn't tried, and some people are like, well, why are you so aggressive? It's like, I would have had 4 minutes had I not fought for the extra one, and still had the least. And I don't think it was purposeful. I don't think anybody just sort of said, oh, let's give him the least amount of time. There's just 10 people and a lot of people in the debate, and they did do it somewhat on polling. But the other thing is, if you're going to do it on polling, shouldn't it count how you're polling against Hillary Clinton? We're only counting the horse race. Right now, in New Hampshire, I lead Hillary Clinton by
Yeah.
2 points.
Yeah.
Trump's down 10 to Hillary Clinton. Shouldn't that make a difference? Which candidate does best against Hillary Clinton? It should be a combination of a lot of different polls. Actually, if we could get them to count that poll, that would help me quite a bit.
We'll see what we can do.
You were asked a question, Cleveland, and you've been talking today about how the Democrats want to grow government. Republicans, a lot of Republicans are in cahoots with the Democrats.
Right.
So when they said, everyone on stage, raise your hand if you want to run as a third-party candidate, why didn't you raise your hand?
I've been there. I've seen what it's like in the third-party world. It's very, our system is pretty much directed towards the two parties. And so I just made the decision when I started running for office that, I'm a constitutional conservative, I'm a libertarian-leaning Republican, but I think my best influence is trying to make the Republican Party come more towards the liberty issues and be a defender of civil rights within the Libertarian Party, within the Republican Party. The third parties, particularly the Libertarian Party, have been very, very tiny, and it's difficult to grow. The debates, you think these are fixed. In the general election, you know who runs the debate commission? It's called the Republican-Democrat Debate Commission. And I promise you, even if Donald Trump's a third party, there will be a concerted effort to only have two people on the stage.
Should you're a Republican, the other folks up there are Republican, one raises his hand and say he won't pledge to support his party's nominee, should he be in Republican debates? Should he be on a Republican stage?
In a way, these debates are sort of paid for by all the work and energy and sometimes the money of Republican activists. So Republican activists have to ask themselves that. Because are we going to let someone take advantage of all of our hard work, all of our money, all of our time, all of the things we do to bring Republican primaries together, which are really done by the activists. They aren't really typically done by the state. The party is, people all believe in something. Do we want to put all that energy into someone who's using us and won't promise to remain part of the party? As much as I may not like the nominee and may not be excited about him, I pledge to support the nominee because if I'm the nominee, I need those people to support me. Yeah. When I won my primary, I won in a big way against the establishment. I got 60%, my opponent got 40%. But I couldn't have won the general election without his 40%. So he endorsed me, and I went and talked to his supporters and tried to get them to work for me, saying, look, we have our disagreements, but I'm way more conservative than the Democrats going to be. We've got to stay together, and we do. But some of that, it means you don't always get your way, but you know that you want that your party is better than, you believe your party to be
Yeah.
better than the other party.
Yeah. What's your dad saying about the race and your work in it to date? Is he a tough critic, or is he a big supporter, or what?
A big supporter, not without his own opinions and advice. But really, we don't talk about a lot of the specifics of it. You know, when we're home, it's more father and son and grandkids, and my family's this enormous family. When we get together for dinner, there's 50 people. And so they're really just big family gatherings and more low-key, not really any, and we'll talk about issues sometimes. But no real specific, like, oh, you need to be using this polling firm. It never was kind of.
I figured that wouldn't be the case.
That never was his nature anyway.
Right, big picture.
Yeah.
You're still running, right?
Excuse me?
Not for president, but you're still running? to keep fit?
I'm a walker and a bike rider. Not much of a runner. A little bit of running, but not much. Mostly walking and bike riding.
Okay.
You had said, and correct me if I got this wrong, but I thought I had read after the debate that you had said you were going to or willing to rededicate your campaign in some way to taking out Trump. Is that right? Can you clarify that or explain?
Sounds like a good thing, but I don't think I said that. But
I heard that.
no, I think that it's become evident to me that if nobody points out that the emperor's not really wearing any clothes, that maybe people will continue to think he's wearing clothes. And I mean, he continues to say things that are complete and utter nonsense, and nobody's calling him out on it because they're afraid he'll call them stupid. So I've called him out on it, and sure enough, he called me stupid. So, but I mean, you know, ultimately, people have to decide if there are valid arguments. If he has one, or I have one, or somebody has one. But I think calling people fat, calling people stupid, saying the Mexicans will pay for it, things like that don't make any sense. And someone ought to stand up and say, that doesn't make any sense. How can you say that?
Well, do you think that you that affected you negatively at all? As my friend Trump says, they all go down in the polls when they attack me.
Now, we were having a little bit of troubles in the polls, really, since he's been in the race.
Sure.
So I think it's really not me attacking them that's the problem. It's that he's tapping into the same vein of anger and the same sort of anti-establishment. So my job is to point out that, you know, I'm unhappy with government too. I'm unhappy with what's going on in Washington too. But these are my set of policy proposals, and this is why I'm somebody who comes from a limited government movement my whole life. And this is a guy who comes as a liberal Democrat who just recently switched to say he's a conservative Republican. But remember, he's a reality TV actor, all right? And so we have to wonder, is he playing a role here?
Yep.
And I think if I don't point that out, there's a danger that too many people are just liking that he calls Rosie O'Donnell fat, that we could run into a problem as a party and as a country if we wind up with someone who leads us that we have no idea what their real philosophy is and how they would run the country.
Well, that's what Mr. Will's talking about tomorrow, so it's timely with your interview, and you guys have to go.
Yeah.
He's got to go to Nashua.
Yep.
Right?
Thanks for having us.
Hey, it's our pleasure. Again, thanks for doing the event.